Vatican's Holocaust by Avro Manhattan, Chapter 20, The Virgin Mary and the Secretary of the USA Navy Corps for World War III. 40 years before the trial of the 86-year-old Croatian Minister of the Interior in a Zagreb court, which pronounced him guilty of war crimes and sentenced him to death, the possible outbreak of a Third World War had been not only envisaged, it had become also a certainty. Indeed, it had been considered a blessing by Atukovic and Pavelic, or the Ustashi battalions by Archbishop Stepanek, by Cardinal Midzenti, and by other experts. It had been expected with no less eagerness in certain quarters of the USA and by the highest authority at the Vatican, the Pope himself. Pope Pius XII, diplomatic and political arch-intriguer, was a firm believer in its inevitability. More than that, he conditioned millions of Catholics to accept it as such, indeed, to welcome it as an instrument for the propagation of the power of the Catholic Church. He justified it on the claim that the Virgin Mary was his ally. In 1917, the year of the Russian Revolution, she had appeared to 3 illiterate children in Fatima, a desolate locality in Portugal. Her apparition had been accompanied by a somewhat strange miracle. The sun became pale 3 times. It turned speedily on itself like a Catherine wheel. At the end of these convulsive revolutions, it seemed to jump out of its orbit and come forward towards the people on a zigzag course, stopped and returned again to its normal position. This was seen by a large crowd near the children and lasted 12 minutes. The Fatima cult derived from the alleged appearance of the Virgin Mary to 3 sickly children at Fatima, Portugal in 1917. Following the appearance of Bolshevik Russia and world communism between the First and Second World Wars, the cult was soon transformed into an ideological crusade. The Virgin's prophecy that Bolshevik Russia, unless annihilated, would bring destruction to all nations became a powerful religious and ideological weapon in the armory of the Catholic Church and her political allies. This was so particularly during the rise of Hitler, who preached exactly the same doctrine. The Fatima cult, with its anti-Russian message, was magnified by Pope Pius XII, who gave it a new impetus when Russia was attacked by Hitler in 1941. After the war, Pius XII used it in his conduct of the Cold War. Monster pilgrimages totaling 1 million people each were organized to the Fatima shrine. The Pope used to send his own papal legate to give official sanction to the political message of the Virgin Mary. The fact that the other 2,000 million human beings in the world never noticed the sun agitate, rotate, and jump out of its location did not bother the Catholic Church in the least. On the contrary, the Catholic masses were told to believe that the sun, on the appearance of the Virgin Mary, had truly moved on a zigzag course as proof of the authenticity of her presence and, of course, her messages. The Virgin's messages had been to induce the Pope to bring about the consecration of the world to her immaculate heart, to be followed by the consecration of Russia. Russia will be converted, she foretold. The Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me. But she warned, should this not be accomplished, Russia's errors will spread throughout the world, causing wars and persecutions. Different nations will be destroyed in the end. However, the Virgin promised, by way of consolation, that the Catholic Church would triumph, after which the Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me. Thereupon she, Russia, shall be converted, and a period of peace will be granted to the world. These quotations are from the authenticated messages of the Virgin Mary herself, as related to one of the children fully accepted by the Catholic Church as genuine revelation by the Mother God. Within a few years, the cult of Fatima had grown to great proportions. The number of pilgrims multiplied from 60 on June 13, 1917 to 60,000 in October that same year, from 144,000 in 1923 to 588,000 in 1928. The total for the 6 years, 2 million. The Vatican took the promises seriously Monsignor Pacelli, the future Pope Pius XII, and the Grey Eminence behind Pope Pius XI sponsored a policy supporting fascism in Italy and then the Nazis in Germany to help the prophecy come true. To such an extent, he was the chief instrument in helping Hitler to get into power. This he did by urging the German Catholic Party to vote for Hitler at the last German general election 1933. The basic idea was a simple one. Fascism and Nazism, besides smashing the communists in Europe, ultimately would smash communist Russia. 1929, Pope Pius XI signed a Concordat and a Lateran Treaty with Mussolini and called him the man sent by Providence. In 1933, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. 1936, Franco started a Spanish Civil War. By 1938, two-thirds of Europe had been fascistized, and the rumblings of the Second World War were heard more and more ominously everywhere. Concurrently, however, Europe had also been Fatimized. The cult of Fatima, with emphasis on the Virgin's promise of Russia's conversion, having been given immense prominence by the Vatican. In 1938, a papal nuncio was sent to Fatima, and almost 500,000 pilgrims were told that the Virgin had confided 3 great secrets to the children. Thereupon, in June of that year, the only surviving child, advised by her confessor, always in touch with the hierarchy and hence with the Vatican, revealed the contents of 2 of the 3 great secrets. The first was the vision of hell, something well known to the modern world. The second was more to the point, a reiteration that Soviet Russia would be converted to the Catholic Church. The third was given, sealed in an envelope, and put in the custody of the ecclesiastical authority, not to be revealed until 1960. The dramatic reiteration of the revelation of the second secret about Soviet Russia immediately assumed a tremendous religious and political significance. The timing of the disclosure could not have been better chosen. The fascist dictatorships were talking the same language, the annihilation of Soviet Russia. The following year, 1939, the Second World War broke out. In 1940, France was defeated. The whole of Europe had become fascist. In 1941, Hitler invaded Russia. The Virgin's prophecy, at long last, was about to be fulfilled. At the Vatican, there was rejoicing, since now Pacelli had become Pope under the name of Pius XII. In 1939, Pius XII encouraged Catholics to volunteer for the Russian front. Catholics, most of them devotees of the Virgin of Fatima, joined the Nazi armies from Italy, France, Ireland, Belgium, Holland, Latin America, the USA, and Portugal. Spain sent a Catholic Blue Division. In October 1941, while the Nazi armies rolled near Moscow, Pius XII, addressing Portugal, urged Catholics to pray for a speedy realization of the Lady of Fatima's promise. The following year, 1942, after Hitler had declared that Communist Russia had been definitely defeated, Pius XII, in a Jubilee message, fulfilled the first of the Virgin's injunctions and consecrated the whole world to her Immaculate Heart. The apparitions of Fatima opened a new era, wrote Cardinal Sorera in that same year. It is the foreshadowing of what the Immaculate Heart of Mary is preparing for the whole world. The new era in 1942 was a totally Nazified European continent, where Russia seemingly wiped off the map, Japan conquering half of Asia, and world fascism at its zenith everywhere. The fascist empire vanished with the collapse of Hitler. In 1945, the Second World War ended, and Soviet Russia, to the surprise of Pope Pius XII, emerged as the second greatest power on earth. The cult of Fatima, which had suffered a devotional recess with the defeat of the Nazi armies, now with the suicide of Hitler, was suddenly revived. And in October 1945, the Vatican ordered that monster pilgrimages be organized to the shrine. In 1946, Our Lady was solemnly crowned before 500,000 pilgrims. The crown, weighing 1,200 grams of gold, had 313 pearls, 1,250 precious stones, and 1,400 diamonds. Pope Pius XII addressed the pilgrims by radio from the Vatican, saying that Our Lady's promises would be fulfilled. Be ready, he warned. There can be no neutrals. Never step back. Line up as crusaders. In 1947, the Cold War began. Hatred against Communist Russia was promoted, headed by the Vatican, which sent a statue of Our Lady Fatima with a message on a pilgrimage around the world. She was sent from country to country to arouse anti-Russian odium. Whole governments welcomed her Within a few years, as the Cold War mounted, the statue had gone to Europe, Asia, Africa, the Americas, and Australia, and had visited 53 nations. The East-West split continued to widen. In 1948, the frightful American-Russian atomic race started. In 1949, Pius XII, to strengthen the anti-Russian front, excommunicated any voter supporting the communists, and soon afterwards, American theologians told the USA that it was her duty to use atom bombs. The following year, 1950, the pilgrim statue of Our Lady of Fatima, who had started travel in 1947, the very year of the outbreak of the Cold War, was sent by airplane accompanied by Father Arthur Broussard on the direct instructions of Pope Pius XII. Where? In Moscow. There, with the warm approval of Admiral Kirk, the American ambassador, she was solemnly placed in the church of the foreign diplomats. For what specific reason? To wait for the imminent liberation of Soviet Russia. Not content with this, Our Lady appeared in person 15 times to a nun in the Philippines. She repeated a warning against communism, after which a shower of rose petals fell at the nun's feet. An American Jesuit took the miraculous petals to the USA to revive the energy of fanatical Catholics headed by the criminal Senator McCarthy and many of his supporters. American warmongers led by prominent Catholics were meanwhile feverishly preparing for an atomic showdown with Russia. Top Catholics in the most responsible positions were talking and nothing else. On August 6, 1949, Catholic McGrath, Attorney General, addressing the Catholic stormtroopers of the USA, namely Knights of Columbus, at their convention in Portland, Oregon, urged Catholics to rise up and put on the armor of the church, militant in the battle to save Christianity. Christianity, of course, meaning for Catholic, the Catholic Church. He further urged a bold offensive. In that same year, not a Catholic, one of the most highly placed personages of the U.S. government, James Forrestal, the main crusader against communism at home and abroad, helped Pope Pius XII to win the elections in Italy by sending American money, plus money from his own pocket. James Forrestal, who was in a very frequent contact with the Vatican, with Cardinal Spellman, knew better than anybody else what was going on in certain Catholic and American quarters. For one simple reason, he was none other than the American Secretary for Defense. One day, upon hearing a civil aircraft overhead, he dashed along a Washington street with the most fearful message. "The Russians have invaded us," he shouted. Later on, notwithstanding the assurance of Pius XII that the Russians would be defeated with the help of Our Lady, Catholic James Forrestal, American Secretary of Defense, jumped from a window on the 16th floor of a building in the American capital, yelling that the Russians had better be destroyed before it was too late. James Forrestal, USA Secretary of Defense, a loyal and selfless American, was one of the most tragic, highly placed victims of the Cold War. Stalin's ruthless intransigence and the West's fear of communism was skillfully exploited by Pope Pius XII, who permeated the mounting Russian-American antagonism with a spiritual and ideological mystique. This he did with the use of religion and the unscrupulous promotion of the Fatima cult. The cult's paramount prophecy, Orthodox Russia would become Catholic. The prophecy's fulfillment implied the military invasion and occupation of Russia by the West. J. Forrestal, methodically briefed by the Vatican on a communist menace, became so convinced of the inevitability of a USA-Russian atomic showdown that he even helped Pius XII to win the elections in 1948 and 49 by contributing funds from his own salary to the Italian Catholic. One day he dashed along Washington Street shouting that the Russian armies had landed in the capital. During the night of 21st, 22nd May 49, he jumped from a window on the 16th floor of the Bethesda Naval Hospital and was killed on impact. The following year, another fanatical Catholic was appointed to another important post. Mr. Francis Matthews was nominated Secretary of the American Navy. On the morning he took the oath of office in June 1949, Mr. Matthews, his wife, and all their 6 children contritely heard Mass and received Holy Communion in the chapel of the naval station in Washington. A few months afterwards, October 1949, Cardinal Spellman was summoned to Rome by the Pope, with whom he had repeated and prolonged private sessions. Although given right sharp to speculation, the sessions remained a well-guarded secret. The new Catholic Secretary of the U.S. Navy, strangely enough, soon afterwards began unusually active contacts with other prominent American Catholics. Among these, Father Walsh, Jesuit Vice President, Georgetown University; Cardinal Spellman, the head of the American Legion; the leaders of the Catholic War Veterans; and with Senator McCarthy, the arch-criminal senator, who, upon the advice of a Catholic priest, was just beginning his infamous campaign, which was to half paralyze the USA for some years to come. The Catholic press began a nationwide campaign of psychological warfare. Open hints of a quick atomic war were given once more. The culmination of all these activities was a speech delivered in Boston on the 25th of August 1950 by Mr. F. Matthews, the Arch-Catholic Secretary of the U.S. Navy. The spokesman of certain forces in the States and in the Vatican called upon the USA to launch an attack upon Soviet Russia in order to make the American people the first aggressors for peace. As the initiators of a war of aggression, he added, it would win for us a proud and popular title. We will become first aggressors for peace. The speech created a sensation both in the USA and in Europe. France declared that she would not take part in any aggressive war, since a preventive war would liberate nothing but the ruins and the graveyards of our civilization. Britain sent an even sharper protest. While the people of the world shuddered at the monstrous proposal, George Craig of the American Legion declared in August 1950 that yes, the USA should start World War III on our own terms and be ready when the signal could be given for our bombers to wing towards Moscow. The fact that the advocacy of a preventive atomic war was first enunciated by a Catholic was no more coincidence, for Mr. Matthews, the head of the most important branch of the American Armed Forces, the American Navy, the largest naval war instrument in the world, had become the mouthpiece of his spiritual master, Pope Pius XII. Arch-Catholic Matthews was not only the most frequent ring kisser of the members of the Catholic hierarchy in America, he was one of the most active promoters of Catholicism in action in the USA. In addition to which, the super Catholic Secretary of the American Navy was the chairman of the National Catholic Community Service, and more sinister still, the Supreme Knight of the Knights of Columbus, the shock troops of Catholic power in the USA, and last but not least, a secret privy chamberlain to Pope Pius XII. The Catholic hierarchy, the Catholic press, the Knights of Columbus all supported Matthews' advocacy of a preventive atomic war. Jesuit Father Walsh, the foremost Catholic authority in the USA and a former Vatican agent in Russia in 1925, told the American people that President Truman would be morally justified to take defensive measures proportionate to the danger, which of course meant the use of the atom bomb. When the USA went ahead with the manufacture of the hydrogen bomb, even the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, Senator Brian McMahon, shrank in horror at the prospect of the sure massacre of 50 million people with such a monster weapon. Yet Catholics approved of its use. Father Connell declared that the use of the hydrogen bomb by the USA was justified because the communists could utilize the large armed forces to weaken the defenders of human rights. Advocacy of a preventive atomic war by the Supreme Knight of the Knights of Columbus, i.e. Mr. Matthews, assumed horrifying significance when it was remembered that the Secretary of the U.S. Navy war speech did not come as a surprise to certain selected Catholic leaders or even less to the Vatican. How was that? Simply that Mr. Matthews had disclosed the contents of his Boston speech to top Catholics prior to its delivery. In fact, days before it was delivered. Chief among these Catholics was the head of the USA Catholic hierarchy, Cardinal Spellman. Now, it must be remembered that Cardinal Spellman was in continuous personal contact with Pope Pius XII, whose intimate friend and personal advisor in political matters he had been since the Second World War. Cardinal Spellman, moreover, was the counsel and personal friend of the most of the influential military leaders of America, so that whatever of importance was known at the Little Vatican in New York, as Cardinal Spellman's residence was called, was instantly known at the Vatican in Rome, and vice versa. Pope Pius XII, had been kept well informed about the whole process long before Matthew's Boston speech. Indeed, the evidence is that he was one of its main tacit instigators. The continuous visits at this time of top USA military leaders to the Pope, 5 in one day, the frequent secret audiences with Spellman, the unofficial contacts with the Knights of Columbus, all indicated that Pius XII knew very well what was afoot. A few years later, in a hate crusade speech broadcast simultaneously in 27 major languages by the world's main radio stations, Pius XII reiterated the morality of a defensive war, that is, of an atom and hydrogen bomb war, calling for, as the London Times somberly described it, what almost amounts to a crusade of Christendom, and what the Manchester Guardian bluntly called the Pope's blessing for preventive war. Ante Pavlik, Archbishop Stepaner, whom Pius had promoted to cardinal, and all the Ustashi battalions at such a papal war cry made ready. This time they would not lose, since their protector, Pope Pius XII, had now allied himself instead of to Hitler to new support and partner, the mightiest nation on earth, the victorious United States of America.